let's talk about coping mechanisms.
Yeah, it's something that I see so much in my work, one-to-one as a counsellor, is seeing how people deal with stuff on a day-to-day basis. You know, what's a learnt behaviour from parents or caregivers? You know, what do you see your friends do in school? What's acceptable? You know, we don't really consider those consciously. It's just something that we fall into.
That's it. And as we fall into them, like to a certain extent, it's unconscious if we can't get a grip on what it is. So I suppose it all begins with noticing like what it is they're actually doing, and then in that moment, even if we just take a 5-second pause before we do whatever it is they're about to do, before we reach for the next beer bottle, before we open up like private mode on the laptop, before we start to do whatever else it is that we're about to do at that particular point in time, it's just having that 5-second pause and realizing, what is it that I'm doing, and more importantly, why is it that I'm doing this? And come back around to this idea of vulnerability. Like, what need underneath all this is not being met, which I'm trying to solve. And give yourself credit and compassion for realizing that you are trying to solve it. You're trying to solve it in an ineffective way. But it definitely comes down to an unresolved need making itself known if we're just brave enough to listen to it.
Yeah, what you talked about there is about, I guess in some ways, soothing. It's a way of soothing something. And maybe at some points we don't even know what it is that we're soothing. Yeah. And it's a form of avoidance, escapism in some way. But if we've never even had the courage to even face what it is that we're soothing or trying to soothe, the old coping mechanisms, the old way of soothing just continues. Yeah. As you mentioned before, in a space of unawareness and just, okay, I've been doing this for ages, so I might as well just continue it. Even though at some point it's not useful anymore, in the lack of options of what can I do instead, it just continues.
Yeah. And I think alcohol is like a really acceptable way to do that. You know, we're taught, especially in British culture, you know, to start using alcohol at a really young age. You know, it's so acceptable for us to just go out drinking every single weekend or through the week, and we don't realise that we've got this way of being, this way of behaving and interacting with people socially that becomes a coping mechanism, and we're not even aware of it. You know, so it's just a way, like you said, of suppressing or depressing emotions or not facing something that's challenging. And again, if we've not had something modelled for us by our caregivers or, you know, our immediate circle, then all of a sudden we've got these behaviours and habits that we're completely unaware of. And it's just seen as socially acceptable for us to do certain things. So like you said, if we've never been shown how to have an argument or how to have a debate, if we've not been allowed to feel a full spectrum of our emotions, we constantly feel like we have to limit ourselves in some way. And therefore we have these coping mechanisms and ways of self-soothing which feel normal, but mask what's really going on for us.
It's safer, right, to mask?
Yeah.
It's safer to have these armors. This story of, I can only dance when I'm drunk.
Yeah.
Right. I can only have these kind of conversations when I have alcohol.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really key one. Only having those conversations when you're drunk. Because that's their vulnerability, isn't it?
It's okay to go, I love you, bro.
Yeah. I was like, oh man, I was so drunk last night.
Yeah.
Fucking hell, what did we do? You know, I can't believe that Jerry said this or Pete said that, or, you know, what a whopper. You know, it's acceptable to cry at a funeral or to show emotion at a football match because your team's lost. But how would you do that in just any other aspect of your life?
Yeah. And there's a really natural point from there where it's like, oh, I wasn't myself, or I wasn't me last night. And it's like, oh no, you were you, but can you accept that that is also a part of you? Maybe a part of you that you like to distance yourself from a little bit in terms of your day-to-day life, but can we actually make room for the fact that this is also you? It's a part of you that maybe we need to explore a little bit more with all this, and starting to realize that within it all, and noticing what the purpose really is behind the coping mechanism. Like if we're struggling to cope, what is it that we're struggling to cope with? So with a lot of this, if it then becomes, let's say very stereotypically for a man trying to overachieve, and as a result the method of coping mechanism is procrastination, just to keep it very, very loose at this point in time. This idea of, well, when you look at the goal that you're trying to achieve, how possible is it given your resources in terms of finances, emotional capacity, how much time you've got, how it balances everything else in your life? Just from a very, very practical level, have you even got the resources to even manage this? And then is it actually a goal that you really could achieve in 5 years, but you've given yourself 6 months? In which case, is the time pressure too much as well? And can we accept that maybe, although this sounds impressive to say to other people, we need to actually bring it back down? And even if we bring it back down all the way down to what feels like an embarrassingly low point, and if we still can't manage that, can we accept that actually the starting point needs to be lower than that still, so that coping mechanisms don't need to start to come in with it all? I have a great goal to run a marathon, not a problem at all, but if you can't run a mile, learn how to run a mile. If you can't run a mile, learn how to run 200 meters. If you can't run 200 meters, learn to put your shoes on and then step outside. Like, if you can accept that that is where you are at that point in time, then that's where the real journey is with all this, because that starts in honesty, it starts in truth. And you don't need the coping mechanisms to put the shoes on and go outside for 1 minute. Or maybe you do. Maybe that needs to be lower still. But in this case, let's say you do. Then if you know that you can cope with that, then by definition, you don't need a coping mechanism beyond that. Whereas if I said at the weekend, I'm going to go and run a marathon, I've just done a park run, I'm feeling really good, like, it's going to be way too much. I'm going to come up with a million reasons for it. And there comes a point where then I've got to not feel guilty about myself. I've got to not blame myself for just setting an unfeasible task. And that's what's like nestled in with all this, especially as a man. And I mean, as a human, but especially as a man, from what I've seen in my work.
And there's something in that as well of when we take on too much, but we don't realize it. You know, like what you were saying about doing a marathon, you know, we'll try and use like the gym or sport or exercise as a way of managing a situation sometimes to like escape. But we don't recognize that actually we're just adding more stress to the bucket. Like we're just putting another stress factor on ourselves, and it's just another way that we're actually masking or suppressing that thing that we're not looking at. And again, it's just building that pressure, isn't it?
Like I call myself a recovering type A. Like work was my identity, overachieving is my identity, and there is a reward aspect in overachieving in both material and compliments and recognition. Running a business, performing day and night. So I was working days and I was working evenings for years, not realizing that it was a way for me to escape myself. This mask and armors that I wear to go, okay, my identity is overachieving. If I'm not overachieving, then I'm not going to be accepted or loved by people around me. And it was a point that I played this character in the world of this overachiever, where if I didn't play that character, I didn't know what else. Who am I if I don't overachieve, if I don't overperform? And then I guess in some way for me, bringing as an immigrant, there's a level of that lack of safety. If I don't overachieve, if I don't contribute, if I don't add value, then I don't feel safe because there's a need for me to keep progressing. And from the recognition that actually it's okay for me, as you mentioned before, take a pause and take a break and set realistic expectations. Bloody hell, that's scary for me to set realistic expectations because it's too easy. If I don't beat myself up and make sure that I have this goal or strive towards this unachievable target, then I'm going to become a lazy bastard, right? That was the story that I came with in the past. And with a level of self-compassion and self-acceptance and recognizing, okay, I don't need to achieve as much. I can take the pause. I can go slower and actually enjoy life a bit more rather than be on overdrive all the time and keep moving forward. And I see it in my clients too, in that overachieving aspect. And if that's coupled with a lifestyle where there is a need to perform and earn a certain level of income, and it's crazy, there's a feeling of trapped to go, I need to earn this much because my house, my car, my kids go to private school, and if I stop doing these things, then something needs to break somewhere. And as the man, as the role of the provider, I need to just keep going. I'll think about myself later.
Yeah, and there's a really, really like beautiful moment in all that where if you can catch yourself, you might have to catch yourself in hindsight at the very beginning with all this, but it's noticing that inner critic voice that you've just sort of got in your voice there, in your head there, sorry, it's, if I don't do this, then I'm a piece of shit. If I don't do this, then I'm lazy. If I don't do this, then I'm not a man. It's realizing that that's not even you talking about yourself. That's just this internalized voice of all these other authority figures. Yeah. It could be from parents, it could be from leaders in certain businesses, it could be from like, just online personalities that we're aware of. It could just be from like the zeitgeist, that's just like what's going on at this point in time, and just realizing that this is probably what I think other men are thinking, therefore I'll internalize this voice. And all that's happening there is we're just judging ourselves over and over and over again, not having any room for rest or humanity. Yeah.
And imagine if we've been doing that for 30 years.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, we see guys that come onto our retreats or into our spaces, and they've just had this narrative or this dialogue of what they think they are, and it's completely based on these outside judgments, these connotations of what it means to be a man or a husband or a father or a brother or a provider or a son, looking after your parents. It's like, wow, you know, they don't have that sense of self or that sense of identity beyond what other people have told them they need to be or should be.
And there's a massive thing in that, which is, if let's say, using that example of like I'm as being a good father, if let's say you do something which brings on that thought of, oh my God, I'm a bad father, well, that's where we begin. I'm a bad father. If we learn to take a step back, we'll start to realize, oh, I think I'm a bad father, or I notice I'm a bad father. If we take a step back from that, it's I'm having the thought that I'm noticing that I'm a bad father. There's steps of separation there. This is too much involved. I'm a bad father. There's too much negative energy to be able to come up with a really practical solution there. But if we can learn to take these steps back, not even that I'm just thinking about this, but I noticed that I'm having the thought that I'm a bad father, that there's a lot more practicality there where we can start to reintroduce this humanity, have a look at like what parts are moving, which parts are in control of, which parts we're not in control of, and realizing where coping mechanisms start to fit in, so that the next time we realize we have that thought of I'm a bad father, it's, oh, actually, am I a good father who's doing the best he can? How am I turning this really negative voice into, at the very least, a neutral voice? Ideally more so than that still, but at the very least neutral. Because that's all we're doing over and over and over again. And we can't catch all of them, but we've got to at least realize that this inner critic voice, it knows everything. It's on us all the time. It's like perfect CCTV. It's recorded everything. And in the worst case scenario, and it will use it against you, and it will use it against you at the worst possible time when you're at your most tired. Yeah. And it's just realizing that just don't play that game.
And it's difficult to challenge that, isn't it? Because we are so hardwired to remember the negative, to remember the traumas, the injuries that have been done against us, or how we felt shame or guilt or embarrassment at different times. And it's so much harder to remember the good stuff and all the positive things that we do. And then it becomes so unbalanced with how we measure ourselves against that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a conscious effort then. There's almost like a recognition that we need to make a conscious effort in recognizing I use the word gains and the steps forward. Mm-hmm. There's an ideal, there's a perfection idea to go, okay, I need to be the perfect father, I need to be the perfect business owner, I need to be the perfect executive or leader. And then if I'm not that, then going back to the inner critic, I'm a shit leader, I'm a shit father. And then there's this massive of a gap, so Dan Sullivan calls it the gap and the gain thinking. There's so many of my clients in my practice, in my work, it sees from the lens of the gap, I'm not good enough. Rather than seeing, okay, I want to run a marathon, that's the goal. I've been practicing it, running a marathon. I guess this is your journey, right? I can run a lot further now than I did in 6 months ago. I wouldn't even dream about running 6 months ago. Now I can do a kilometer without out of breath. Like 6 months ago, I couldn't even dream about running. So there's a movement forward in the steps that we've taken forward, and there's a recognition of the steps. Like speaking personally, I wouldn't even consider or remember the steps I've taken forward. All the good that I've done, all the achievements, it's almost like there's almost like a numb feeling. Okay, I've achieved this. I've won this award. Great. What's next? Oh, well done. You won this deal. Okay, what's next? Oh, we've done this work. We've got. Okay, what's next? Rather than pausing and recognizing, shit, I've just done that. Wow, amazing. Let me give myself a pat in the back.
There's an amazing book by Hal and Sidra Stone called Embracing Your Inner Critic, which beautifully sort of goes into that. And it's this wonderful book where the idea is that you can start to notice how the inner critic is your enemy to begin with, but ultimately through recognition, you can actually turn it into an ally. So then every single time that you have these thoughts, rather than that being a problem, you can then start to, really, really embrace it and have that as a sign of grace and a sign of honesty, and it's a sign you're moving on the right direction, which comes back full circle with this idea of coping mechanisms. If you notice what you are doing and you're noticing how you're trying to cope at that point in time, it's realizing the context of what you're trying to cope with. Like, even if it's not about the coping mechanism itself, like what emotion, what overwhelming situation you're trying to deal with, what support do you need that you've not got at this point in time? There's so much nestled in it all, but we just need that brief pause, that brief break. It could be as short as 5 seconds. It could be going on as long as like days and going on a holiday and really taking time to reflect on it. But it's just realizing that, what am I struggling to cope with? Why am I struggling to cope with it? And can I be honest enough with myself to realize and accept that I'm struggling with it? Yeah. And especially for men, I feel like that third part there is where the gold is definitely going to be.
Yeah, and I think it starts and ends with self-awareness, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, how self-aware are we of each of these things, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviours, our habits, and how much are we actually willing to take responsibility for that? And that ultimately it starts and ends with us.
Yeah.